Children and Young Persons Act 1933. Section 50. Age of Criminal Responsibility. It shall be conclusively presumed that no child under the age of 10 years can be guilty of any offence. Dominic felt the metal tang of blood in his mouth as he ran, fast, through the tunnel. His breath came out in rasps, echoing against the brick. He could hear the footsteps of the 5 police officers as they entered the mouth of the underpass behind him. The muscles in his legs burned as he tore out of the gloom and into the summer dusk, and he felt his knees weaken. He stumbled, slowed, and came to a stop. Panting hard, he bent and rested his hands on his thighs. Lifting his head, he looked at the hill path ahead of him. He was never going to make it. Almost with relief, he stood and staggered back to the exit of the tunnel, waiting for the officers to reach him. He leaned back against the raw brick and realised that he was still very drunk. As the officers got closer, Dom held up his left hand toward them, palm outwards, and looked down to spit out a shining goblet of saliva. A moment later, he felt himself taken forward with a force so great it sent him face downwards onto the dirt path. He recognised the wrench in his shoulders as his arms were pulled back, and the rub of metal to his wrist bones as handcuffs closed around them. He felt the deeper pain of a thick-soled boot in his ribs, on his spine, the full weight of a grown man kneeling on the back of his legs. He managed to turn his head just in time to see the tread of a large black boot closing down upon his face. In the background, he could hear his friend, Kaz, who had now caught up with them, screaming. As his body buckled, Dom remembered, almost in abstract, that it was his 19th birthday. When I was at law school, I was taught to memorise things I would rarely use again. The difference between various types of will, how to distinguish a joint tenancy and a tenancy in common, why an invitation to treat was not as exciting as it sounded. What I was not taught was how to represent a child. In my first few years as a barrister, I realised that this was a skill so vital I must master it for myself. I began to understand that representing those charged with a criminal offence meant that I was more than just a source of advice or a mouthpiece for my client's case. I needed to be a psychiatrist, a counsellor, a social worker, a mother, and many other things besides, none of which had appeared on the pages of my law books. I had to learn how to identify mental health problems, victims of domestic abuse, alcohol, and drug addictions. I grew to know who might, after court had finished, go home and try to end their life. But the cases that first asked the most of me were those in the youth court. I would sit with my teenage clients in the hallway of the courthouse, trying to take their instructions on the trial they were about to face as they stared at their phones or the floor, or the sky through the window, or anywhere but at me. I became familiar with courtrooms made up of desks rather than benches. Our hearings had breaks to maintain their short attention spans, and reminders to use language my child offender could understand. I learned to play paper, scissors, stone with my younger clients under the desk, to keep them occupied while we waited for the magistrates to return with their inevitable guilty verdicts. I worked out how to talk to 12-year-olds in a Ritalin stupor, how to ask them about the summer when they robbed, threatened, and stabbed their way through the nights. I also discovered, crucially, that my clients did not want me to try to be their friend. Too often they would treat the social worker who came in lieu of an absent parent, with a sing-song voice and attempts at camaraderie, with withering contempt. I convinced my young clients that deference was not the same as weakness. In doing so, I gained their trust and, occasionally, respect. This respect would enable me to hush the gang of 20 waiting in the corridor for their missing member, or to chase my teenage client down the court stairwell, persuading them to come back to the courtroom and face their custodial sentence. When I first met Dominic, he had turned 18 and so, now technically an adult, his criminal career had moved from the youth court up to the magistrates and crown courts. But it was the youth court that marked his first conviction for burglary, not long after his 11th birthday. In that same year, still not into adolescence, Dominic was sentenced twice more, just 3 months apart. If he had lived anywhere else in Europe, he would, at 11 years old, still have been considered a child.